God's chosen ones. They've never seen a calling like yours. Science confirms it. They stare. They whisper. They try to name what you carry, but their words fall short because their language was never built for it. You walk through life misread, mislabeled, even feared. But what if I told you you were never meant to be understood? Because you weren't sent here to make sense. You were sent here to make heaven known. And if you've ever felt like your silence spoke louder than your words, if you've ever shifted a room without even trying, then this message wasn't just written for you. It was encrypted in heaven with your name on it, the divine anomaly. Aiyana had always felt like an echo from a different dimension. In a small, dust-laced library tucked inside Kansas City's forgotten district, she sat most evenings, not to read, but to remember. Not to study, but to decode the strange pull inside her chest, the one that told her she didn't belong to the timelines everyone else lived in. She had tried, once, to fit in. Wore the pencil skirts, smiled on cue, answered phones at the law firm, even went to small group on Thursdays. But no matter how hard she tried, she felt like a frequency trying to harmonize with a world tuned too low. They called her overly intense. Her mother once whispered, "You don't have to feel everything so much, baby." But Aiyana couldn't help it. She heard things no one said. Felt atmospheres shift when she entered a room. But woke up at exactly 3:17 a.m. for weeks. Heart pounding, tears on her cheeks. No dreams, just presence. She wasn't emotional. She wasn't dramatic. She was marked. There were moments she'd sit in the cafe and strangers, unprovoked, would confess their deepest regrets to her. Moments when birds wouldn't fly away from her hands and children would stare into her eyes and whisper, "You're not from here." It wasn't flattery, it was recognition, because Aiyana didn't carry charisma. She carried evidence. Evidence of a realm unseen. Evidence that heaven had encrypted a code into her soul that this dimension didn't yet know how to read. And that is what made her dangerous to darkness, because when God places evidence in a human frame, not even silence can hide it. If you've ever walked into rooms and shifted them without trying, if people either love you fiercely or fear you without cause, if you've carried loneliness like a crown and mystery like a burden, then maybe, just maybe, you're not unexplainable. You're God's encrypted one. Chapter 1. Untroubled Light. She was 7 the first time she knew she was different. While other children played tag under a Midwestern sky, Aiyana sat behind the school building, drawing invisible shapes into the dirt. She didn't know why her fingers moved that way. She only knew the symbols didn't come from her mind. They came from somewhere else. The teachers called her dreamy. Her classmates said she was weird. Her mother said she was just too sensitive. But none of them saw what she saw. The way the light shimmered around certain people, how it bent in sorrow when someone walked past with a broken heart. She could feel it. Sometimes she could hear it. Grief, guilt, truth, all singing quietly behind people's eyes. Once, during Sunday school, she began to cry. The lesson wasn't sad. It was about David and Goliath. But when the pastor lifted his hands to pray, Aiyana saw a golden light pour from his palms, like oil. She looked around, expecting others to gasp. But no one moved. No one saw it, not even him. Later they asked her what was wrong. She tried to explain, but the room went quiet. Grown-ups exchanged glances. Her mother pulled her aside and whispered, "Don't say things like that out loud. People won't understand." So she stopped saying it. By the time she was 12, Aiyana had learned how to keep her knowing quiet. She didn't mention the names she heard in the wind before someone called. Didn't tell anyone when a friend's grandmother came to her in a dream to say goodbye the night before she passed. She wasn't trying to be mystical. She was trying to survive. Because every time she let the light speak through her, the room tensed. People averted their gaze, even at church, especially at church. They seemed uneasy around her. She realized it wasn't that people didn't like her. It was that people didn't know what to do with someone they couldn't label. She wasn't loud. She didn't argue. She didn't wear strange clothes or shout on corners. She just carried something that unsettled the air. And in a world addicted to noise, her resonance was too much. So they called her names. Too intense, too spiritual, too much. But what they never said, what they couldn't say, was the truth. She wasn't misunderstood. She was untransformed. Because when God wraps a soul in mystery, not everyone will have the key. And Aiyana, even as a child, was a language written in holy ink, a living prophecy sealed in silence. She would learn later. You weren't rejected because you were wrong, you were rejected because your light didn't match their limited vocabulary. They wanted predictability, but she carried prophecy. And when heaven places encrypted light inside a human, not even silence can hide it for long. Frequency, not volume. She never needed to speak to make the atmosphere shift. Aiyana walked into the room like a whisper that cracked the air. Not because of beauty, not because of power, but because of something felt. A pressure in the spirit, like heaven holding its breath. No one could name it, but they all noticed it. The assistant manager at the grocery store stuttered when handing her change. A woman at the DMV cried for no reason while stamping her papers. The barista misspelled her name every single time. Not out of malice, but from some unconscious tremble. It wasn't intimidation, it was invitation into a realm their minds couldn't access, but their souls couldn't ignore. She wasn't loud. She didn't push, didn't demand. But people moved out of her way like she carried unseen royalty. And the strange part was, she didn't try to be anything. She just was. Aiyana learned early that there was a power greater than performance. Presence. And her presence didn't announce itself with applause, it simply shifted frequencies. It was unnerving to some. They'd say, "You're intense," or "You make people uncomfortable." But deep down, they knew it wasn't discomfort. It was disruption. Because when someone walks in the truth of their design, without apology, everything not rooted in truth begins to quake. There were moments in meetings where she offered a single sentence and the entire strategy pivoted. Moments when her silence pierced deeper than lectures. Moments when men in power stumbled over their words, not because she threatened them, but because she mirrored them. Her stillness was a mirror, her discernment, a vibration, her love, weightless thunder. She wasn't performing, she was broadcasting heaven. And those tuned to lesser frequencies either shut down or got exposed. She once asked God, "Why do people react to me like this? Even strangers flinch when I speak gently." And heaven whispered back, "Because they are tuned to noise. But you carry my frequency." That's when she stopped apologizing for being too quiet, too deep, too direct. She realized she didn't need to shout, didn't need to convince, didn't need to explain, because heaven doesn't compete with chaos, it commands it by presence alone. And if you've ever been told that you were too much when you were just standing still, if your silence has ever unsettled a room, if people have mistaken your stillness for weakness, then maybe you're like Aiyana. You're not loud, but you're louder than noise, because you're not operating in volume. You're operating in divine frequency, heaven's evidence. It began with dreams. Not just the kind that play at night, but the ones that stayed with her, clinging like dew on her spirit long after she opened her eyes. Images, symbols, warnings, and sometimes answers. She started waking at 3:17 IMM. Always the same time, always the same sensation, like someone was standing at the edge of her bed, not to harm her, but to remind her. At first she was terrified, then curious, then obedient. She stopped fighting the awakening and started meeting it. At 3:17 a.m. she'd get up, light a candle and sit on the floor. Not to perform, not to summon, but to listen. And the silence, it wasn't empty, it was alive. Sometimes scripture would rise up in her spirit without her opening the Bible. Sometimes a name would echo, someone she hadn't spoken to in years, and when she reached out, they would say, "I was just about to give up." She realized something. She wasn't going crazy. She was tuning in. Her patterns weren't madness, they were messages. And the more she leaned in, the more confirmations came. A stranger at the grocery store called her messenger. A child on a flight said, "You look like an angel but without the wings." And one day, sitting in the back row of a church she didn't belong to, the preacher stopped mid-sermon, looked directly at her and said, You're not just called, you're evidence." He didn't even know her name, but heaven did. The shift within. Aiyana stopped asking to be normal, because normal couldn't explain why she knew when someone was lying, even behind a smile. Normal didn't account for how streetlights flickered when she prayed out loud. Normal didn't offer blueprints for what to do when birds flew toward her window, and didn't leave. So she let go of trying to be explainable and began to live as evidence. She wasn't here to be believed. She was here to be undeniable. Because when heaven places something inside you, it doesn't need validation. It produces fruit. And her life? It didn't make sense. It made impact. Final revelation in this chapter. You are not strange. You are strategic. You are not unstable. You are unveiled. And you are not unrelatable. You are heaven's evidence in human form. You are the reason others weep without knowing why. The reason rooms grow quiet when you enter. The reason truth rises in people who've lived a lifetime of lies. Because when you show up, the invisible becomes undeniable. And if that has been your story, if people have looked at you and said, "I don't know what it is about you, but something feels holy," then maybe you're not just chosen. You're the proof that heaven has a plan, God's walking equation. She didn't leave because she wanted to. She left because her spirit outgrew the place. The city that once held her now felt like a cage. Every conversation echoed with the same script. Every relationship ended at the edge of her calling. So one morning, Aiyana packed her life into a weathered suitcase, whispered goodbye to no one in particular, and boarded a flight with no clear destination. Only obedience. And something strange happened on that plane. A child in the row ahead turned around, stared at her with knowing eyes and said, "You look like light. Not pretty, not nice. Like the kind that doesn't entertain, the kind that exposes." She didn't respond. She just smiled. But inside, something cracked open. Because deep down, she had always known. She wasn't just a woman. She was an equation wrapped in skin. Not a formula to be solved. A frequency to be felt. The shift becomes visible. In the new city, things didn't make sense, but they moved fast. People offered her opportunities she didn't ask for. Doors opened without keys. Strangers stopped her to say, "You have something. I don't know what it is, but I feel better just standing near you." And she realized she wasn't navigating life. She was rewriting the blueprint of how heaven could move through earth. She was a living algorithm of the divine. Her obedience activated things. Her presence disturbed darkness. Her laughter cracked chains no one saw. She didn't preach, she embodied. Didn't need a platform, she was the portal. The divine realization. God hadn't sent her to quote scripture. He sent her to become it. Because sometimes the greatest messages from heaven aren't written in red letters, they're written in living people. People like Aiyana, people like you. You don't fit because you weren't meant to. You don't belong to systems because you were built to disrupt them. You don't follow patterns because you carry a heavenly pattern no eye has seen yet. You're not an accident. You're a walking equation of heaven's intelligence. Soul carrying a formula too holy for surface minds. That's why you're unexplainable. Why some adore you and others fear you without cause. Why systems break when you enter. Why relationships tremble when you stop pretending. Because when God moves through someone without filter, the world can't analyze them. It can only adjust. And Aiyana, she walks now with no need to explain. She knows who she is. She's not a mystery. She's a move of God in motion. And if you felt like everything around you either bends or breaks when you show up, it's not because you're difficult. It's because you're divinely disruptive. You're not here to fit equations. You are one, a walking blueprint, heaven's holy math. And the world will have to study you for generations just to grasp what God already wrote in full. Chapter 5. When heaven confirms you, it was in the quiet place that it happened. Not on a stage, not in a revival, not with oil poured or hands laid. It was in her one-bedroom apartment, with dishes in the sink and unanswered texts blinking on her phone. She had been fasting, not for a breakthrough, but for clarity, not asking God to give, just asking him to speak. And that night, heaven didn't thunder. Heaven whispered. She heard it, not in her ears, but in her spirit, down in the marrow. They'd never seen a God like the one I placed in you. Tears streamed down her face, not out of sadness, but recognition. It was the confirmation her soul had waited decades for. She wasn't dramatic, wasn't delusional. She was divine encrypted, and finally heaven said it out loud. The moments that confirm without words. The confirmation didn't stop there. At the grocery store, the cashier paused mid-scan and said, "You feel like peace?" On the sidewalk, a homeless man looked up and said, "I see angels around you." At a random prayer gathering, someone whispered, "I don't know your name, but your presence gave me hope again." And, Aiyana realized, confirmation doesn't come through compliments. It comes through collisions, the trembling of a child's hand reaching for yours, the sigh someone exhales after sitting near you, the sudden silence in a room when you walk in. Because when you carry God unfiltered, you don't have to declare it. Creation recognizes it. Where heaven confirms you, earth must respond. Not always with applause, but with alignment. The burden and beauty of being marked. Being confirmed doesn't mean being understood. In fact, after the confirmation came, the warfare increased. Friends ghosted her. Opportunities dried up. Even some believers avoided her with quiet unease. But she didn't shrink. She rose, because now she knew. She no longer needed to be believed. She no longer feared being misread, because the Most High had signed her spirit with eternal ink. You are not strange. You are mine. For those who know this feeling, if you've ever waited your whole life to be seen, and then one moment, one whisper confirmed what you always suspected, if you've ever felt like your life wasn't random but assigned, if you've carried truth too big for rooms too small, then this is your confirmation too. You weren't sent here to be applauded. You were sent here to awaken, to mirror the invisible, to walk like proof. You are not the mystery. You are the confirmation, the prophecy wrapped in flesh, the light that speaks without words, the living yes of heaven. And now the world must adjust, the living yes of heaven. Maybe you've never had the words for why you've always felt different, why silence became your sanctuary, why love felt heavier in your hands than it did in others, why people either clung to you or feared you. You weren't imagining things. You were awakening. Because God doesn't always send his power wrapped in thunder. Sometimes he sends it wrapped in you. They didn't know what to call you, so they called you strange. They didn't understand how you saw what you saw, so they said you were too intense. They didn't know how to interpret the light you carried, so they tried to dim it. But here's the sacred truth they never told you. You're not a mystery. You're the answer. You are heaven's evidence, living proof that God still speaks through presence, that light still moves through flesh, and divinity can look like you. Every rejection was training. Every silence was sacred. Every room you walked into and shifted, even without a word, was confirmation. You don't need permission to be who you are. You only need to remember who sent you. You are not here to be defined. You are here to disrupt definitions. You are God's walking equation, the one they can't figure out, because you weren't meant to be solved. You were meant to be felt. If something in your spirit burned while you listened, if tears rose and you don't know why, if this message felt like it was speaking the words you couldn't say, that's not coincidence. That's confirmation. I am heaven's evidence. Let the algorithms of earth hear the echoes of heaven. If you're still standing after all the misunderstanding, type, God still confirms me. And if this story touched something ancient in you, share it. There is someone else still questioning their gift, still feeling like they're alone in the mystery. Your share might be their confirmation. And if you believe this mission should continue and want to be part of the light we carry forward, just follow the leading of the Spirit in the description below. This isn't just content, and you were born for it.